Hey there.
Hi. Can you hear me all
Okay.
right?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Okay, let me check on my OBS. Can you talk one more time?
Check. 1, 2. Check.
Okay.
1, 2.
Cool. Sounds good. Okay, so I'm just going to record. Okay. So yeah, I'm just recording. Yeah. Okay. So I'm recording for just for my own personal upload, and that's fine, right?
That's fine. Yeah.
And then this is going live on yours.
Yes. Live.
Cool. Okay, cool. Sounds good. Did I hear correctly your name is JD?
Yeah. My name is JD, and you're Carson.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice
Uh,
to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Do you want to tell everyone more about yourself, where they can find you?
Yeah, so my channel is just called Reasonable Vegan, and you can just type that in. I think that's the first thing that comes up. And I am vegan. I've been vegan for about 8 years, and been what I call philosophically vegan for maybe about 20 years. And I have a slightly different take on veganism than a lot of vegans do, but and so I like to talk to people and challenge other vegans on limits of their veganism, and I also like to talk to people that are not vegan. Oftentimes, I'll talk to hunters and get some ideas on that kind of stuff. So, anyways, you can find videos like that on my channel.
Okay. Great. So you say you've been vegan for 8 years now?
Yeah, as far as the definition of not consuming animal products or like wearing animal products, yeah, around 8 years.
And um, are you in your 30s? What's your
Uh,
general age?
yeah, 37.
37. Okay. So you were 29 when you started.
Yeah. The first time I went vegan, I was actually about like 18, 19, somewhere in there. And then stopped here and there, back and forth, vegetarian, so on. And but for going straight without stopping the past 8 years, yeah.
Okay. Well, I saw you in my comments section um, interacting with some of my subscribers, kind of mining it for interviews.
Oh yeah, so I hop around. I mean, my channel's pretty new. I started about a month and a half ago, and I just like to have conversations with people, usually like through Zoom calls. So I'll hop around to various different vegan or anti-vegan videos, and anybody that I see that their comment makes me interested to talk to them about that topic or just about veganism in general. I'll see if people want to do Zoom calls, and I do about maybe 5 to 10 Zoom calls a week, and I'd say a good portion of them are just finding random people in the comments to chat with.
Gotcha. Well, I did peruse your channel, checked out some of your your interviews that you did, debates. Um, I enjoyed, I enjoyed most of it. Um, One of the things that struck me was this comment of yours: "Look for all sides." Are
Hmm.
you do you when you say that, do you mean listen to both sides, or
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's oftentimes it's a both, but sometimes there's various different sides. I was mostly just pointing out that I can't remember exactly. Let's see, man, I love seeing notifications on your videos. Super helpful. Yeah, just pointing out that if somebody got information from you or anybody, that before they feel confident in a stance, they should try to hear as many possible options as possible.
right? Um, let's see. This video was, yeah, it was the vegan nonsense. David Rams and Chris Hines talking about the soybean industry. Are you familiar with the soybean industry?
I saw a debate you had with somebody else that isn't one of those two guys on the Crucible, I believe it is. And I that was kind of the first time I had heard anything talked about the soybean industry.
Was that the debate with Jeffrey Phillips and his girlfriend, or the debate with just Jeffrey Phillips?
I think it was just him.
Okay, so you missed the first one.
Probably, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, without the context of the first one, the second one doesn't really make much sense because we didn't get out of. Did you notice what he was trying to get me to concede to in that debate?
I can't remember all the details. It just sounded like maybe you guys had different studies showing different amounts of what part of the soybeans used, if it's more so used for the meal used for livestock versus oil used. But I'm not too familiar with it, and I don't know if I fully followed what you guys were talking about.
Okay. Well, I have listened, like I say, to some of your videos. It seems like, and this is where look for all sides. It kind of struck me. I wanted to talk to you about that. I'm not sure that you've actually given the knowledge that you could acquire regarding the crop deaths. I don't think that you've given it a fair shake. It seems like every time that is brought up, you kind of shrug it off as something that's happening unintentionally. And while there are quadrillions of animal lives that are snuffed out and unintentionally, most of those deaths are actually happening because of intentional measures. In other words, well, let me just ask you, if I was to ask you, what are all of the different ways that animals die as a result of the crop agriculture, the same crop agriculture that produces the mainstream vegan menu? Could you give me a pretty good representation of all of those different ways that animals die?
My guess is no. If you would have asked me a month ago, I probably would have told you something like tractors tilling up vegetables might kill some mice and snakes. And then if you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have also added in elements of pesticides and how not only do they kill the bugs to prevent the bugs from getting on the food, but maybe hummingbirds die in the process. And then what I've learned most recently is that maybe farmers will hire hunters to kill animals that are about to get the crops, like maybe foxes, beavers, stuff like that. I'm not sure. Maybe bunnies, stuff like that. So I agree with you. This is something that I could probably do a lot of learning on. And there's so many things in the world. I'm very fascinated by a lot of politics, lots with philosophy. So I can't take all the time to do all the research. I want to. I'm wondering if maybe I'll even learn something from you here. But in my mind, it's a philosophical conversation. In my mind, if we can prevent suffering, I want to. And so anyways, that's about the gist of my knowledge on it. Have I missed a good amount?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There are animals that die as you've mentioned before as a result of the plowing and the planting. Hold on. And the harvesting. And that is traditionally the only crop deaths that the vegan movement would acknowledge. Can you hear that dog barking in the background?
I can. I'm personally not worried. I hear me and you more than the dog, but I do hear the dog.
Those winter dogs. Yeah, traditionally the only crop deaths that the vegan movement would acknowledge are the harvesting deaths.
Hmm.
And there was, always the sort of laughing it off, mocking those deaths, laughing at them. Um, and they would say, well, these animals, if they don't get out of the way of the harvesting equipment, then, they're pretty stupid. And maybe you know, they
Hmm.
get what they ask for. However, um, that is the least. That's like the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the death and suffering that's caused by the crop agriculture that produces the vegan menu, and it
Hmm.
produces the omnivore menu as well. But the vegans do want to legislate that we all depend upon that crop agriculture. So before I give you all of these ways that animals die and suffer as a result of crop agriculture, let's say hypothetically that you learned that crop agriculture was so deadly and caused so much suffering that legislating that we all be forced through basically through, I mean, if you're going to pass a law uh,
Hmm.
criminalizing animal agriculture and hunting and fishing, then that's basically a threat of violence. Because if we disobey, then we will be facing
Hmm.
physical discipline from government. Correct? Could be a death penalty. Who knows? Could be getting shot. Certainly physically assaulted. So it's a threat of violence that I think that the vegan movement is advocating in order to, and this is, I watched one of your interviews, and the guy said, I don't understand why people have such a problem with vegans when all vegans want to do is eat a certain way. Just because they choose not to eat animals is not a reason to dislike vegans. And I was really surprised that you didn't actually kind of call him out on that and say, well, it doesn't stop there. We're not just trying to not eat animals ourselves. We want to force you. We want to force children. We
Hmm.
want to. We don't actually understand human optimal human nutrition, but we're willing to criminalize animal foods. Um,
Yeah, I would say, well, for one, I'd say it depends on the vegan. Certain vegans would maybe go to that extreme. And then, so I didn't really push back on that element because it just didn't seem like one to do at the time. But as far as the claim that it would be, I can't remember what you called it, but the idea of something being illegal being an issue is everything that we make illegal has that possibility of, if you break that law, you can be harmed in the process. If we make it illegal to steal from somewhere, you can be harmed in the process. It's illegal to kill. I personally, at this stage in what all of us understand when it comes to nutrition, would say that I can't imagine making it illegal to eat animal products. I don't think that should be anybody's focus right now. Um, but I would say that laws, in my mind, I lean pretty libertarian, and I think people should just have their freedom, and the only things that should be illegal are things that would harm people or taking from people. And so we for mutual benefit, basically. So we aren't allowed to kill each other because you don't kill me, I don't kill you. We get a mutual benefit. You don't steal from me, I don't steal from you. We have our property. And so the only other thing where I think law should come into it is if there is a moral issue. If something is needlessly being made to suffer, I think it's reasonable to have a law against it. So whether it's somebody's cow or somebody's dog, if somebody's just taking a baseball bat and hitting it a bunch because they get some adrenaline rush, I would say it's fair to make that illegal. If we don't have enough information to know if people need to eat animals or not, I would say it's not fair to make it illegal to kill animals. If that whole question that gets asked to vegans, if you're on an island with a chicken would you eat it? I would eat it in seconds. I would probably, if me and you were on the island, I'd probably eat you. I would do what I need to survive. I care way more about myself than I do about any animals, and I care way more about humans in general than any other animals. It really just comes down to if there is pointless suffering, should we prevent that?
I believe we already have laws on the books that prevent needless abuse of animals. Am I wrong?
Oh, you're probably right. I'm not sure. Somebody was telling me that a lot of those things aren't detailed. But yeah, there's probably something like that. I was just using that as an example of if we ever got to the point of figuring out, like, let's say that it could be proven that dairy is unneeded. Nobody needs it at all. Humans don't need it. Considering that humans for all of history until 9,000 years ago never had dairy.
That's not true. That's not true.
Interesting.
That's not
Okay,
true.
well, let's go with a hypothetical then. Let's just say if we figure this out, if we were to figure this out, then I would say that the process of the dairy industry, it could make sense to have laws against this. But it would have to be pretty thoroughly figured out. Because again, we take care of ourselves. We'll chop down trees to make a house because we need shelter. We don't think about the animal in the tree first. But once we have our shelter and our food, our nutrition and all this, I would say it just comes down to the needless suffering. I am curious though about the humans drinking milk. I mean, I don't even know how we would know or not know, but what do you know about dairy before 9,000 years ago?
What I know, what I know is that we have been eating animals for a very, very long time. All of the prehistoric cave paintings depict men out on the prairie hunting with spears and.
Yeah, I just meant the dairy part. And sorry to cut you
Well, that's
off.
what I'm trying to get to.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go on.
So if you go out there, if you're a Native American, for instance, and you go out and you and your team of hunters take down a cow, then a female bison that happens to have milk in its udder, then 100% of all the nutrition there will be harvested and consumed. And so that would occur. There's no evidence that they avoided cows with udders full of milk during their hunting. And in fact, I would wager that they would actually target them because of the extra nutrition that would be available in those udders. So the idea that dairy has to entail modern dairy culture, I think is kind of myopic. However, if a Native American 500 years ago was, killed a cow bison that had a udder full of milk, then that the milk, the contents of that udder and the udder itself would have been consumed in one way or another. The milk certainly would have been consumed by the tribe. And it's a different model than what you're used to thinking about. But we do know that those animals that were killed for nutritional sustenance, and also for their hides, the furs and there was really nothing that wasn't used. Every little bit of the animal was used for the benefit of the people. And so that would include the udder of a cow. And so, we didn't, for thousands of years, we weren't having milk delivered to our doorstep in plastic bottles. But we were certainly consuming what you would call dairy, probably on a semi-frequent basis because it would be part of the natural harvesting prize.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I guess it's complicated when it comes to history. It would be anything not documented. It'd be hard to know exactly. I think what you just claimed is probably pretty reasonable. So yeah, do do you want to that you're asking me about the crop death thing? Did you want to describe more of the crop death thing, or did you want me
Yeah.
to take it a different route?
No, before I go over all of that, I wanted to ask you hypothetically, if you were to get your mind wrapped around the quadrillions of animals that suffer and die because of the crop agriculture that you're proposing we all turn to for our nutritional sustenance. If you found out that there was much more suffering and death involved with that, would you consider maybe supporting regenerative ruminant agriculture?
Um, I would support whatever I thought was cause the least amount of suffering possible while keeping myself and others healthy. So, like for example, let's say that humans could be perfectly healthy on just whole plant foods, and humans could be equally perfectly healthy on just a carnivore diet, like just all the parts, livers, all the part of animals. And then it turned out that when you look at growing vegetables, all the different crop stuff, all the different factory farm stuff, and it turned out that the least suffering that could happen would be with doing a carnivore diet, only just having cattle and then just eating just that, nothing else. I would say that would be what veganism is now. Veganism would be eating only animals because that would cause the least amount of suffering. And to me, veganism is it's a philosophy. It's the idea of causing the least amount of suffering. I wouldn't want to cause more suffering so I could claim that I'm not eating animals. I would want to keep myself the healthiest I can while causing the least amount of suffering. So I think the answer would be that yes, I would want to do, if it was healthy for me, I would want to do what causes the least amount of suffering.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of people that know me and know the arguments that I bring to the table would describe me as being more vegan than most vegans. In fact, I don't know of a vegan that causes as little harm and suffering as myself and my family.
I watched the trailer video on your channel where it's like 2 minutes of showing your farm and kids playing and stuff. It looks amazing. Again, I'm not personally in favor of eating animals, but I'm way more in favor of like those cows roaming on your field. They seem like they have an endless amount of space. And I get the idea of vegans that don't eat animals being against that, but the fact that they would have any focus being against what you're doing versus factory farming, I would find pretty insane. So, but your farm looks beautiful.
Well, thank you. Well, there's that myself and the vegan movement have in common is that I disagree with the concentrated feedlot model. I do not support it. I'm at odds with people like Bart Kay or Sean Baker, people that are kind of poo-pooing the idea of giving their business to regenerative, rotational, grass-fed, grass-finished, organic, going through all of the the ways that you can actually mimic nature, because nature includes animals and plants. Trying to cut one or the other out of the picture is really, when you look at the details of how you would operate to make that work, is harmful to humans. It's harmful to the animals. It's harmful to the environment. And so I support, you should look into a farmer by the name of Gabe Brown. I'm not in an area where, my soil is not considered arable. without a lot of soil amendments at this stage of the regeneration that I'm trying to carry out here, I wouldn't be able to grow something like soybean or broccoli or any mainstream vegan staple. The fields that I took over were farmed as hay growing acreages for decades and decades. And just like what's happened to the soil and the corn belt, uh, it's been mined of all the carbon, and so I've been trying to sequester that carbon back into the soil over the last years. So,
Mm.
but yeah, regarding the crop deaths, you mentioned the harvesting, and you've mentioned that several times on your channel.
Mhm.
I didn't hear you go over the shootings.
I have
Shooting
not
is
gone. I have not gone over them because somebody told me about them in the comments, and I looked it up a little bit, but that person backed out on a conversation, so I didn't get a chance to hear about it.
okay. Well, they shoot animals for encroaching on the crops, wandering too close to the crops. Squirrels, rabbits, doves, swans, deer, pigs, raccoons, armadillos. I mean, the list really just doesn't have an end. It goes on and
Mm.
on. Moles, voles. Uh, and if it's a protected species, then they will actually have to go get a crop protection permit.
Mm.
For instance, that'll allow them to shoot deer out of season. And so
Mm.
they'll go out there and they'll shoot a bunch of deer and leave their bodies to rot in the field. And so all of that nutrition gets passed on maybe to the buzzards, but human beings don't get any part of it.
Gotcha. Quick
And I don't
question
really
for
think
you.
that's
I just want to ask you.
honorable or
Gotcha.
moral.
For sure. I just want to ask a question on. I don't know the creatures you just listed that would be hunted for this reason. Do they like specific crops and not others? Like if we looked at the crops that are grown for livestock, or would those same creatures want to get those crops and get shot for that reason as well?
Well, not really, because, for instance, the crops that are grown specifically, with the exception of 36% of the corn. Okay, 36% of the corn is grown specifically and exclusively to feed livestock.
Mm-hmm.
7% of the soybeans are grown specifically to feed livestock. Regarding the hay and alfalfa, the hay represents about 4% of the crops overall, and
Mm-hmm.
alfalfa hay represents another 5% of the crops overall.
Mm-hmm.
So the majority of the crops are actually corn and soybean. And so you've got a minority of the crops that are actually being grown exclusively to feed livestock, 36%.
Mm-hmm.
The as far as the corn, the the soybean that's grown exclusively to feed livestock is about 7%. So you're wondering, well, how does that translate to 70% of the soy being fed to livestock? This is the way that works. Um, Over 92% of all soybeans are processed to extract the oil. 61% of the world's seed oil is soybean oil. And they use it they put it in all the ultra processed foods. They use it, they sell it as cooking oil, and they use it as feedstock for biodiesel production. And in all of the literature, most of the literature, they group the biodiesel with the livestock mass. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
However, livestock do not consume biodiesel. biodiesel is a consumable. However, human beings consume biodiesel. So it's not fair and it's not accurate and it's actually fraudulent to tell the public that biodiesel, soybean oil, and the refuse that's fed to livestock should be included in the same category. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. But
Look,
just curious though, do the animals though that have to be hunted do? And I'm not trying to do a gotcha or anything. I'm just honestly curious. Even though the percentage of vegetation grown is way higher for eating than it is for feeding the livestock, though the stuff that we do grow for livestock, do the animals go after that and those animals get hunted down, like the armadillos and all those things you listed?
no, no, no.
Okay.
We're talking about alfalfa and hay. Well, with the exception of the 36% of the corn and the 7% for the alfalfa and hay, no,
Okay.
they do not go out and kill animal. They don't shoot animals to protect those crops.
Because the animals, for the most part, wild animals don't want that.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
They're not drawn to. They're not drawn to it.
And I'm guessing that you don't even like the idea of corn and soybeans being grown for animals because yours are grass-fed, correct?
Correct.
Now, do you think people should that all animals should be free-range grass-fed, and due to the drastic lowering of amount of animals that could be eaten at that point, that there should just be a higher cost and maybe taxed more, and that people would eat a lot less meat?
Well, I think that this would be. I think as you do more research, for instance, you've got farmers that I'm emulating that have been doing this for a longer period of time than myself, like Joel Salatin, for instance, when his family took over the acreage that he's on, it was basically a desert. The soil had hardly any carbon in it at all. When the soil is depleted of carbon, then the soil cannot absorb water. It can't hold water. It's hydrophobic, which causes flooding and erosion. But regenerative ruminant grazing systems are where you take a herd of ruminants, and you can do the same thing with chickens, and you move them just like you would, or just like a natural herd would move across the prairie. You can see the same thing happening in Africa, in the wild territories of Africa, where these herds of wildebeests are huge, millions of head of animals in one group, moving across the surface of the earth like a giant amoeba. And they stay kind of close together because the predators are around the outside. And this is something that you would learn if you studied ecology, which really should be a kind of a vegan staple. Every vegan should have to study ecology. But part of that ecology, part of what makes all of these carbon cycles and sequestering carbon into the soil happens because of predator pressure. And so the predators are on the outside of the herd, and there's different predators. There's, lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. And so that keeps the herd kind of bunched together, a little bit less spread out. And so in nature, like in Africa, what's happening there is that as this amoeba of ruminants moves around and the predators are keeping it kind of compact, but always moving, then the animals have time to eat about a third of the vegetation that they come across, and about a third of it ends up pooped and peed on. So a lot of that water that they drink actually becomes water for the plants. And then also they're they're pooping on it, and that's how the soil is enriched. I mean, if you learn about soil health, the health of the soil is actually helped along by the manure, urine, and even the dead bodies that decay into the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And so as they move past, like I say, they eat about a third of what's there. They step on and stomp about a third of what's there. And if you look at the ungulate or ruminant hoof shape and the dent that it leaves in the soil as it passes by, as the animal walks past, is actually ideal to catch, hold, and contain seeds. And so as seeds fall down into these hoof marks, it's a perfect little place for them to germinate.
Mm-hmm.
And so as this herd of ruminants moves along, the pasture that they leave behind is poised to explode in vegetation. So this idea that you'd be saving land by removing animals from it is actually counterintuitive, but it's just the opposite. If you remove the animals from the land, you're actually destroying it, because you're removing the primary way that the soil would maintain and build soil carbon, soil biology, and soil health. And so we're doing that in the regenerative ruminant industry, where there's every day more and more and more of us that are using these principles, where we're using electric fence to put up temporary paddocks, which are like small pastures, where it keeps the ruminants closer together, but we leave them there for a specific amount of time. In other words, we don't let them overgraze it. We simulate exactly what's happening in nature. Instead of having wolves surrounding them and keeping them bunched together, we're using that electric fence. And whenever they've eaten about a third of what's there, then we move them to the next paddock, and then we move them to the next paddock. And depending on what size your herd is and what size your paddock is, you might be moving them once every 3 hours, or you might be moving them once every 12 hours, or you might be moving them once every 24 hours. But it depends on the number of animals that you have and the amount of acreage that's in your paddock. And this is the model that I'm following. That's what I'm emulating people like Joel Salatin, and he has turned his farm into such a lush paradise of forage that 1 acre can feed 1 cow for 400 days.
Oh, wow.
And so this idea that because I know of the study that that you might be referring to, or that people have referred to when talking to you, that was looking at an operation that was not ideal. In other
Are
words,
you talking about when I asked if all factory farming ended and everybody did this, would that feed everybody? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, there's this idea that, well, if we transition to this regenerative ruminant grazing system and away from the concentrated feedlot model, then you might as well just throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's not going to be enough food to go around. And the truth is that no, if you do this correctly, then your forages will become so lush that you will be able to support so many ruminant animals that there will be no shortcomings as far as animal foods. There will be more animal foods than we are now. This idea that we have to feed animals grains or grain byproducts is a complete myth. And part of that is being actually perpetuated by the soybean and corn industries. Very powerful industries who influence legislation. They influence, news. They influence what the people are being taught, and they're actually poisoning themselves to replace meat. As you know, in other words, if you buy soybean, what's left over after you squeeze the oil out of soybean is soybean meal.
Mm-hmm.
So you squeeze the oil out of it, and you have this. It's a bunch of cellulose with some protein in it. You can actually extract the protein, and that's what soy protein isolate is.
Oh.
It's okay. You probably know what soy protein isolate is. It might be what they make
Mm-hmm.
soy curls out of. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, soy curls is just the entire soybean, I believe. But the fake meats like Beyond Burgers and Impossible, those are made out of soy protein isolate.
So the profit margin, you take the same product and you sell it as livestock feed, you might get say $15-16 for a 50-pound bag of soybean meal marketed to livestock.
Mm.
You take that same product and you market it to humans, and you're going to be charging about hundreds of dollars. You're going to be charging hundreds of dollars for the same thing. So what they're looking at doing is taking their because the profit margin on meats is actually very low. And so what they want, what they're, and you look into the companies that are spearheading the plant-based mock meat market, and some of the most prevalent corporations that are spearheading that are companies like Tyson Foods, which is a meat supplier,
Yeah.
JBS, which is a beef supplier. Even the American Cattlemen's Beef Association is involved in trying to transition away from beef, believe it or not, because they're controlled by corporations like McDonald's, Wendy's, JBS. They're looking to, they're preparing to abandon meat altogether and only supply vegetable proteins. And so they don't consider themselves meat companies anymore. They consider themselves protein companies.
Interesting. Well, just so
And
you can
so,
know about me, I find it to be a huge bummer that most people don't care about health, and therefore, when people eat, whether they're vegan or not, when people eat cakes and cookies and donuts and all the, all the unhealthy things, it saddens me, and it's a bummer that nobody cares about it, and so even though I don't think people need to eat meat or dairy. I definitely don't think people need to eat the fake stuff, and I think they should stay away from all that.
yeah, there's this subject. The general subject is so huge that it's difficult to sit down and have a conversation with someone in one sitting and cover everything, because I would challenge your idea that we don't need meat. I know that that meat does not contain B12. I've heard you talk about that.
Yeah.
I heard you also say that everyone's got a vitamin D deficiency. I disagree with that. Now, there's also, we're learning more and more about these animal derived nutrients. For instance, creatine has recently been declared an essential nutrient. Did you know that?
I heard you talking to Vegan Gains about that, I think. But no, I don't know the details on that, no.
Okay. So it's been determined scientifically that we cannot, they've got this very elementary definition of essential and non-essential. So a non-essential nutrient is supposed to be a nutrient that we can produce on our own if we have the raw materials to produce that. So a vegan diet is also low in the elements that we would use to produce the non-essential nutrients. But then there are situations where we cannot, our bodies cannot produce enough of these non-essential nutrients such as creatine. And under which conditions are those? Well, for creatine, it's when we exercise, when we're pregnant, when we lactate, when we grow, when we're sick, when we have diabetes. So would you really want to put people in a situation where they are going to be deficient in creatine every time they're growing, every time they're pregnant, every time they lactate?
Yeah, no. So I wouldn't. I don't know enough about this, so I'd want to look into it. And I think I hate the idea that maybe everybody wants their intuition makes them want to be right about something. So if a vegan hears what you just said, their go-to is, how can I make that wrong? Instead of I just want to know the truth. And so in my mind, like, I want to know the truth. I want to see how the science goes with it. I want to find out. And like I said before, I care more about my health and the family of the health of my family and humans in general than not. So if we can be fine without animal products, that's the goal for me. But if not, so I don't know much about the thing you're talking about, and I'll look into it. But let's take B12 for example. Let's imagine that all of a sudden, starting tomorrow, that humans could not, like, all of a sudden starting tomorrow, there is no way to get B12 out of eating, aside from eating animals. Like, let's cyanocobalamin, let's just say it stopped working completely. Then I would say, due to what I know would happen with a B12 deficiency, that I would want all humans to eat enough meat to get B12. And I would consider that vegan. I'd consider that perfectly fine, because I don't know to what level vegans would want their health to drop. As far as I know, you can be perfectly healthy on a vegan diet. But if you couldn't, if your health would drop, then I would say it's perfectly fine to consume animals to get to your healthy level. Similar to, like, a lion would eat only animals to get to their healthy level, but we should probably only eat what we have to. So I guess I would say with this creatine thing, if you are correct, I would eat animals and try to get my family to eat. My whole family's vegan. I would try to get them to eat enough for that. But it wouldn't be, oh, I'm just not vegan anymore, I'm going to start eating all the things. I would eat the necessary amount of things, and then aside from that, I wouldn't touch another thing.
Yeah. Of course, the trick there is, are you knowledgeable enough to figure out exactly how much each person would have to consume to maintain health? I don't think that you've got any type of background in optimal human nutrition, or am I wrong?
No, you are correct. And that's why I like to look into things. I like to find out what I can find out. And there's so many studies, so many approaches that you're right. If we found out that you needed a certain thing, then that's great. Like every study I've looked into with B12, it turns out that cyanocobalamin works really well. Now, with myself, I was very deficient in vitamin D, and I took supplements, and it went up a little bit, but then I started taking higher doses of supplements. I live in Oregon, so I don't get as much sun as you do in Texas. But now my levels of vitamin D are incredible, and it's from this vitamin D supplement. And if I couldn't get it from that, I would eat what I needed to eat to get it. Because I have to be realistic. I can't move to the equator to get it from the sun. So I would probably kill animals to get my vitamin D, but I wouldn't eat in excess. I would research the best I could, and then I would kill what I had to kill to be healthy, because I'm not going to sacrifice myself for animals.
Okay, I appreciate that, but I do find it interesting how flippantly vegans refer to supplements, because I have researched many supplements and how these are manufactured. This
Mm-hmm.
idea that they're created in a lab with a guy with a little glass flask and some four-leaf clovers and a little bit of distilled water and a kiss. That's not how it happens.
Yeah.
You'll find out that each one of these supplements requires at the very top of it, and this is the way you should do it. If you think that vitamin D supplements are the way to go, then you can do this on your own, or you and I can sit down in a live stream and do this together, where we can find out what are the ingredients that make up the supplement vitamin D and how much methane, because every step along the way requires a certain amount of heat and pressure. And so there's going to be methane, and there's going to be associated methane emissions. For instance, on a related note, the nitrogen, which is used in 95% of the factory crop agriculture that provides the omnivore and vegan menus, those are all fertilized with synthetic nitrogen, which is created using methane. And the methane emissions, the companies that were producing that had self-reported to the EPA what their emissions were. And then Cornell University came out and actually measured those emissions that were in the atmosphere downwind from these factories and found out that they had self-reported less than 100%. Like, in other words, the emissions were actually 100 times more than they had self-reported. And they actually, once they did the math, the synthetic nitrogen for crop agriculture was emitting more than 3 times as much methane into the atmosphere than all other industrial processes combined. And so,
Interesting.
and so when you say, just kind of like flippantly, well, I'll take a supplement. I'll take a vitamin D supplement. Well, you're not even looking into how is vitamin D supplements manufactured.
Yeah.
And then you find, let's find out that there's 3. I haven't looked it up yet, but we can do that. You find out, let's say hypothetically, there's 3 major ingredients, and then you find out that, well, each one of those are industrially produced as well. So this one's got 3 more that are industrially produced, and this one's got 3 more that are industrially produced, and this one's got 3 more. So now you end up with 9 subchemicals, and you find out that they also have to be industrially produced, and they have 3. And each one of these steps, and in other words, if you were to print out the entire chemical list that's required to produce your vitamin D supplements, then you end up with this giant essay of methane, heat, pressure, toxic chemicals, petroleum, and all of this. And I've heard you say that you can't, that your specialty, your focus is on suffering, and you don't really focus that much on the environment. But I hate to be the one to break it to you, but you know who lives in the environment? Animals. And so you can't separate suffering from the environment. If you do, then in my opinion, you're not being honest with yourself. Or maybe if you are honest with yourself, then you're not being intellectually honest with your audience, because the animals live in the environment. So when you destroy the environment, you're also killing and harming animals.
Yeah, no, I don't think we should destroy the environment. Every moment I can, I try to do what I could to not do so. If I go to get coffee at a Starbucks, I'll take my own mug for them to fill up instead of using some plastic. But when I say that I don't usually get into the environmental side of things, it's because I like to to only talk about what I know about, and what usually it's more so to do with a philosophical take on ethics of it. And so I have not read enough about global warming, environmental stuff to claim to be any kind of an expert on it. So I prefer to, when something is simple that can be done, that seems like there's a consensus on it, then I'm all about it. And aside from that, I hope that the best of the scientists and the politicians together figure out the best ways to implement laws that work well with the environment. I just wouldn't want to just go, oh, this thing says do this for the environment, therefore let's do it. So that's why I made that claim about the environment. But as far as what you just said, I think that's something worth looking into. I think more vegans need to look into that. And if you are correct, if a vegan that cares about the environment and says that they use the argument of environment for why to go vegan, if they also take vitamin D supplements and they aren't aware of the environmental harms, then they need to make themselves aware. So I think that's a great point you're making. It's just not a topic I happen to focus on, not because I don't think it's important.
I'll give you an example. Let me pull this up real quick.
While you're doing that, I just want to read this to you because just the vitamin D thing. It says vitamin D deficiency is already extremely common, affecting approximately 42% of the U.S. population, according to research published in the National Institute of Health database. I thought it was a lot higher than that, but yeah, I guess 42%. I think estimates are at a high of 6% as far as vegans in the U.S. So I think it's just one of those things where if you live in the U.S., you're likely not getting enough sun for vitamin D. And I don't know like what the people are eating that aren't vegan that don't have good vitamin D levels. But it just seems, well, I know one issue is if you're overweight, you don't absorb vitamin D as well as if you are a healthy weight, and a large amount of people are overweight. So that could be an issue.
Okay, let me show you why that is. And let me give you a real quick background as to why I know all this shit.
Mm-hmm.
My younger brother was born with a horrible birth defect, and this plant-based stuff has been promoted for many, many years, and my mother was victim to it. She was on a plant-based diet when she was pregnant with my brother. And that was also during a time when people started eating fewer organ meats. Because, for instance, beef liver has 20 times more B12. There's more B12. There's about 10 times more folate in beef liver than there is spinach. And so, and spinach and beef liver also has gargantuan amounts of the most effective form of vitamin C. And so they've been slowly socially engineering us off of organ meats and onto plants. And that's just causing deficiencies. So my brother was born with spina bifida, and he's had, I think, about 38 surgeries over his lifetime, major amounts of suffering, not only physically, but emotionally, psychologically. It's been hard. And this happened when I was 2.5 years old. So from a very, very young age, I had a very intense interest in proper, optimal human nutrition. And so I do find myself offended when vegans are willing to kind of play games with people's health like that. But let me show you something real quick regarding what you just said, because they always say, well, the animals, the people who do eat meat are also deficient in these, as if we're eating a whole lot of meat. Well, the USDA has determined again and again that Americans are consuming a diet that's 70% plant-based and only 30% animal-based. And that is something that has become skewed in that direction over the years. And as we've consumed more and more and more plant-based diet, our health has gone down, down, and down. And so right now we're consuming a 70% plant-based diet, and we've never been sicker as a nation. And every other developed nation's diet has become Americanized. Look at Canada, look at Australia. There's an obesity epidemic. There's all kinds of heart disease epidemics, cancer, diabetes. And, they continue to blame animal foods, but the animal foods share of the overall nutrition has gone down, way down. And so you're talking about how, say, what was it, 46% of people are deficient in vitamin D?
Something like
that makes
that.
sense because people are not consuming beef liver anymore, and they're consuming more plant foods than ever before. Most of the majority of the diet is actually these ultra processed foods, and they're primarily plant based. And all of the saturated animal fat has been replaced by things like canola oil, soybean oil. And as these oils have taken over what used to be animal-based oils or fats, then out the window went all of the fat-based, the fat-soluble vitamins, all of the nutrition that came along with those animals. And so now we're if you're going to talk about suffering, we also have to talk about human suffering. So,
well, I agree with you. I don't think we can force people to do anything. So the people that just go get fast food and they're a couple 100 pounds overweight, that are going to suffer from these overly processed foods, I don't think we can talk about that suffering in any way that makes sense to me as somebody that thinks people should have their freedom in a sense to be unhealthy if they want to. Maybe we can adjust how we advertise fast food to kids and stuff like that. I'm not sure.
Do you know that the research shows that vegans per capita consume more ultra-processed foods than any other group of eaters?
I didn't know that, but I don't view veganism in that way. Again, for me, veganism has to do with the suffering element. I wish all people, vegan or not, would stop eating processed food. So I don't have many thoughts on that. Now, if a vegan's choice of eating certain processed foods causes more harm to others, then I would say there's some issue there. But if they're just kind of killing themselves off, it's kind of like smokers. I don't think people should smoke and get lung cancer. But I guess I just wouldn't view that as an ethical issue against others.
Would you say that it would be unethical to take advantage of a Down syndrome individual?
Likely, yeah. I might need a little more information to answer that one.
Well, you have to consider that half the population has a below average intelligence, right? There's a bell curve to everything, including intelligence. So if you look at the bell curve, then you're going to determine that half of the human population is going to be below average intelligence. And so how can you say that it's okay to take advantage of them just because they're not as smart as you are?
Yeah. I mean, really, that would come down to how we could figure out those details. Now, I think with a Down syndrome person, it would be easy. You would just say, you can't do this to a Down syndrome person. With intelligence, it becomes more complicated. But I would say I'm not against the idea of regulations that protect people from being sold unhealthy foods based on our knowledge of maybe lower intelligence. So I'm just kind of playing along with this idea. I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are with intelligence. But if you made it to where it was illegal to sell certain types of processed foods. Like you couldn't sell cookies or cakes or whatever, maybe based on like sugar levels or sugar tax or something, but where somebody would have to buy the ingredients themselves and make it at their home. I could see something like that coming into play with certain types of laws just because of how a society's setup works with money. I don't know if you could stop them from growing their own stuff. Like drugs. Drugs are complicated. Part of me thinks drugs should be legal, but part of me thinks that drugs should stay illegal. But if somebody makes it themselves, they can't sell it, but they can create their own and use it. So I don't know exactly, like, if somebody grows their own sugar cane and extracts the unhealthy processed sugar out of it and makes their own cake and gets unhealthy on their own. I view it differently than maybe stores having this thing that is subsidized and it's so cheap that unintelligent people can keep just gaining wild amounts of weight. Sorry for the ramble, but I don't, something like that.
Yeah. I really hope that you, and I know that you think you don't have time for this, but actually, if you're going to be pushing for legislation to outlaw meat and outlaw animal agriculture, then I think that the rest of us deserve that you actually make time for it. For instance,
just quickly, I agree with you. I do not want to outlaw meat at this point.
Well, at any point, I know that you don't want to do that at this point, but here's an example is that I've heard you tell people again and again that dairy cows are artificially inseminated. Do you think it's not important to tell them that 60% of dairy cows are artificially inseminated and 40% are not? Do you think that's not a relevant point?
I don't know if it would be. So in a case where I bring it up, and maybe I should word it better, where I could be referring to the idea of that they shouldn't be, and therefore the 60% that are should not be. So I didn't know this stat, but so the 40%, is that more so? Is that something like a farm that you have, or do you mean with factory farming?
I'm talking about overall.
Oh, okay.
Overall in the United States.
Gotcha.
The number is 60% of dairy cows are artificially inseminated. 40% are not.
Okay. Yeah, no, I would love to see the stats on that. And I not even that I'm disputing it. I would just want to see them. But I think I might word it differently next time I say it. That's a good point. Because I think sometimes we talk about issues we have concerns with, and sometimes we skip over details. And I think that's worth not skipping over. I don't think the artificially inseminating is one of the worst elements of it. So I think I just kind of skim through it. I do take issue with the pulling the calf away from the mother when we can see the emotional connection. Now, if it was proven to me that what we're witnessing is not an emotional connection and a detachment from their child, then I might feel differently on that. My overall biggest issue probably is actually the machinery attached to the udders that can't detect like pain, or can't detect if there's like a sore or a cut or something on the udder, and it's going to keep pulling and tugging on the cow.
Well, the people that actually operate those machines, they do inspect those cows, because it's actually a misconception that these people that are working in these animal, even the ones that you're referring to where the conditions aren't ideal for the animal's well-being, it's not profitable to sit there and torture an animal. An animal that is suffering lesions or some type of injury on its udder is best pulled aside and healed, because the injury is actually going to be taxing the cow's system, so that it could actually, if you just kept milking it despite some injury, then you could actually end up killing that cow, and that ends up costing the dairy farmer money. And so a lot of the misconceptions that vegans are promoting are actually contraindicated for the economy of these businesses. And so that's your first clue that a lot of these things these stories that you're telling are either not true or they're half truths. For instance, like you were telling, and you weren't skimming over this. I've heard you. I've actually watched a number of your videos, and you were harping on the artificial insemination of dairy cows quite heavily. And now I've explained to you, and you can look this up yourself. Only 60%, not 100%, but 60% of the dairy cows are artificially inseminated. And I've made a video about it. I think for beef cows, it's something like 5% of beef cattle are artificially inseminated.
Do you think they should be? Do you have a take on it?
I think they should do it naturally. You know, I think the people that believe that it should be done artificially, they're dealing with bulls that are way oversized. You know, so if you bring in a small bull, which for instance, I intentionally chose a very small bull that's actually a part low line, Black Angus, very small bull. And so whenever he mounts a cow, it's a very easy thing for the cow to tolerate. It's not like this giant is on top of her. And the benefit there is that this small bull is producing calves with a small birth weight. So I never, ever have to go out and help a cow deliver a baby. They never get stuck because we're breeding calves with very low birth weight, which doesn't mean that they're premature or unhealthy. It just means that they're small babies. They grow into, muscular animals, healthy muscular animals, but at birth, they're easy to birth because go ahead.
Do you take the calves away?
No.
Okay. Because your cows aren't for dairy.
No, my cows are not for dairy. I don't take them away. But I will tell you that I also raise goats. In fact, I've transitioned more into goats now than cattle. And there's an issue that I'm constantly. I just finished, where I'm not quite finished, and I say me. My herd is not quite finished kidding right now. In other words, they're having baby goats, and there's an issue with goats and other ruminant animals where they have a lot of acreage to roam. Well, they'll go out there and they'll and deer do the same thing. They'll set their offspring down in the bushes and they'll walk off and leave them. And the goats will sometimes not come back, never come back to get their babies.
Interesting.
I've had them come back, and because they come back to the home base every night, because I keep them safe from predators that way. So I've got them trained to come home, and sometimes they'll be looking around. Where are my babies? Where are my babies? Well, she left them up there on the hill. She doesn't even remember where she left them.
Oh, wow.
And so I'll have to go up there and find them. And sometimes I can't find them, and I don't know what happens to them. Other times I find them 2 days later and they're half starved to death, and I bring them back to the herd and the mama rejects them because her scent has faded off of the babies. I also watched that video that you referred to about that dog that was trying to save the fish by splashing water on it.
Oh, yeah.
That dog was actually trying to bury those fish. That is the natural. That's the way dogs bury future meals. With their nose, they cover it with dirt.
Interesting.
And I can prove that. And so what happens is, if we watch a lot of Walt Disney movies, then we begin to anthropomorphize animals, and we give them human characteristics that they don't actually have. And it's really not fair to people like my brother that was born with spina bifida, who you're going to perpetuate more birth defects by giving these animals these human characteristics that they don't actually exhibit. You take a dog that's trying to bury a fish so that it can eat it later, and you say that it's splashing water on it so that it can, because I've also heard you say that animals can't reason. Humans are the only ones that can reason, which is why you give more value. You actually value human beings more than you do animals, partly because animals cannot reason like human beings. But then this dog comes along that's trying to bury this fish so it can eat it later, where the fish happens to be laying in a puddle of water. And so there's no dirt there for the dog to bury the fish with. So it's instead of dirt being covering the fish, it seems to be splashing water on the fish in order to keep it alive. But that is a very Walt Disney-esque
Yeah.
understanding of what's going on.
No, that's a great point. I would have thought of that dirt thing, and we can only, we can see what we see, we know what we know, and then we can explain what we think we're seeing. Another example of something like that situation, but this one might be a little more clear cut, was I've seen a handful of videos where maybe a tiger or a lion or various different large cat like kills an animal, but then that animal's baby was there, and then the large cat starts taking care of that baby because it doesn't need to eat it in that moment or anything, and then it'll like almost like imprint on it, and then it like so it seems like some animals have various levels of empathy, and I don't know how well they can reason or how well they can have empathy, but there's this one thing I watched where like a lion was taking care of this little baby wildebeest, and it kept, anytime another lion tried to get near it, it would like fight it off, and it was like mothering it for a couple days, maybe even a week, and then at one point it wandered off too much, and then it got eaten by a different lion. But that lion, the lion, I think it was a lioness, like was starving itself for a week, focusing on protecting this animal. And so I don't know, there can be various different cases where they don't, but I guess that would actually lean towards my initial thought of their inability to reason. It just seems like in certain cases they have some empathy.
Yeah, I've not seen. I will look that up. I will look at it, and I will, tell you. I'll tell the people what I think of that. But I'll tell you my initial thoughts is that all baby animals that are very 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 young, there are certain things that they have in common. They have the big eyes, they have that cute look to it, and there's also a common smell. There's a scent that goes along with a baby mammal, and so I'm not going to discount the possibility that there are, like in a baby wildebeest, perhaps might be triggering the mother instinct in a lion. But the lion is not sitting there reasoning that this is a baby, I must take care of it, because that lion, as soon as those baby scents and all of those cues that would trigger a mammal to exercise protection and care over something, a baby mammal, once they're gone, then that lion is not going to sit there and not eat that animal. That lion very well may have killed and eaten the mother of that animal.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, I think you're right. I read a study recently that was talking about they tested like the hormone levels of adults smelling the heads of newborn babies, and men would become less aggressive when they smell the heads of newborn babies, and women would become more aggressive. So the mothers would be able to protect better, and then the men would be, I'm guessing, less aggressive. It's an evolutionary thing to not harm the baby. And so it could be something like that for sure.
Yeah.
So I have about 15 minutes left. Do you care if I ask you a couple questions that I want to get out real quick?
Sure.
Okay. So one, I couldn't tell for sure by how we were talking. So you want factory farming to not exist anymore, and farming like what you do to be what everybody does. Would you think that should be legislated?
No, I think it should be incentivized. Right now, for instance, the subsidies that go to the livestock industry is about 1/100th of what goes to crop agriculture. And the lion's share of what goes to crop agriculture goes to the corn and soybean industries. And so, people have different opinions on what should be subsidized. Like earlier, you said that maybe these ultra processed foods should be taxed, for instance. Well, then what you're doing is you're letting the government double dip, because they're actually taking the money out of the taxpayers' pockets, putting it into the pockets of the corn and soybean industry, and then turn around and tax us for purchasing the corn and soybean products, and high fructose corn syrup, sugarcane, etc., ultra processed foods, which tend to be corn, soybean, and sugar, high fructose corn syrup, seed oils. And so if we were to either remove subsidies altogether, which actually can be dangerous because we have to consider food security. That's an issue, especially these days with everything that's going on. Food security is an important thing to pay attention to. But it might be beneficial if they took that money away from the corn and soybean industry and began to funnel it into the pockets of people who are doing things, rather they're plant or animal agriculturists, funneling it into their pockets. I know that right now there are some private corporations that have programs for farmers like myself that are practicing regenerative ruminant grazing systems, where we're sequestering carbon from the atmosphere back into the soil. My personal opinion is that the fact that it's in the atmosphere is not an issue. The fact that it was removed from the soil because of the tillage associated with crop agriculture is the issue, because crop depleted soil is hot. It causes huge convection currents that can blow clouds away, rain clouds. It can blow them completely away. And it also makes the soil hydrophobic. It causes erosion. It causes agrochemical runoff, fish kills in local tributaries and rivers. And about 50% of the nitrogen that's causing the oceanic dead zones is coming from the corn and soybean fields. So it's actually not coming from the cattle ranchers. It's actually coming, I can prove that it's coming from the corn and soybean industries.
Gotcha.
Sorry,
go on.
So, I don't think it's best to tax us for something that's being subsidized. That doesn't make sense. If you want to help the people, then drop the subsidies.
Yeah, remove the subsidies. Yeah, I was just throwing out a quick idea of, because we were talking about how people are unhealthy and how things can change.
They're subsidizing those unhealthy foods.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you that should change. But real quick, so just like if you were emperor for the day or for the year or lifetime, and you choose what's done aside from these subsidies, would you say that you think the practices in factory farming would be worth making illegal, similar to it's illegal to beat a dog and a cow with a bat, like that if the practices, because I agree with you, I wish practices were more like what you do, but you think that they should be more like what you do, but if they're not, they should still be thought of as acceptable legally?
I don't think it would be necessary to make it illegal if you made it economically unprofitable.
Because it would be, essentially they'd stop doing it.
Yeah, if you removed the subsidies from the corn and soybean industry, then the profitability would be gone. There would be no reason to criminalize it, because there would be no financial benefit in doing it.
Well, let's just say that a couple billionaires for fun wanted to keep being harmful to animals. So I agree with you that in the real world it wouldn't be, but just morally, would you think that it's worth putting a stop to the current practices?
Well, before I would support that, I would have, because there's two types of factory farming, right? There's factory animal farming and there's factory crop farming. For instance, I don't know if you're aware of the dirty dozen. Strawberries, for instance, are some of the most non-organic strawberries are some of the most pesticide riddled fruits that you can buy. And just real quickly, you asked me earlier, we never did go over this, during the crop deaths that are associated with the crop agriculture that provides the mainstream vegan menu along with the omnivore menu, but vegans want all omnivores to be vegan, so it's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So the crop deaths are shootings, trapping, and gassing. So they'll trap animals and then gas them with CO2. Same thing that they do with pigs, but they do them with things like rodents, voles, moles, field mice, raccoons, squirrels. They trap them and then they gas them. They drown them. They'll actually force water down into their burrows and drown them, prevent them from escaping. And the water level rises and they drown. This is for the vegan menu. Plowing, planting, and harvesting, yes, those kill. Then you've got all of the petroleum-related deaths, because producing petroleum destroys habitat, kills animals. If you're not aware of that, we can cover that on another time. But the petroleum industry is responsible for gargantuan amounts of animal death and suffering. All of the diesel that's required for the equipment that's involved with crop agriculture, the nitrogen fertilizer is methane derived and methane fueled. That's also where those methane emissions that were 3 times all of the industrial productions combined in the United States. You've got the NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the 3 major, most prominent nutrients that have to be supplemented in soil today because of the constant chronic tillage and all of that. Well, the phosphorus is mined, and the mining of phosphorus destroys hundreds of thousands of acres, and it causes major amounts of animal suffering and death and habitat destruction. Same thing with potassium, major amounts of animal suffering and death, fish kills, oceanic dead zones. And then you've got the pesticides, which it's really not fair to just stop with that one word, pesticides. But we do need to look at the suffix, pesticides. What does side mean? CIDE means to kill. So you've got rodenticides. Rodenticides are put all of your orange orchards, apple orchards, peach orchards, kiwi orchards, bananas. All of the fruits require rodenticides. These are anticoagulant, which causes the animals to bleed to death internally. It can happen as quickly as 3 days, but it often takes as many as 3 weeks for the animal to, in misery, finally die after 3 weeks of bleeding to death internally.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause you real quick. Sorry. I want anybody watching this. I know a bunch of people that are looking forward to watching this conversation. I think it's very important for us vegans to take what you're saying very seriously. I just want to, because a lot of people will, like I said before, they're vegans. They'll hear something that will seem to counter their ideas, and they'll try to jump away from it. But this is very important. If to get our fruit trees, there are rodenticides that are making them bleed and suffer to death, then I think that's a huge deal, and I think we should really look into that. And I think, and I agree with you that that might even be a more important focus of law than something else. I don't know if you agree with me here. I'm guessing you probably would, but the death means so much less than the suffering. If you kill something quickly and it just dies, and then you did that to protect your food you're growing, or you did that to eat what you killed, it's an animal that was alive and now it's dead. But the idea of making something suffer and suffer to death is disturbing, and whether it's for crops or not. Yeah,
I agree. I agree.
I was going to say, a lot of the things you're saying, they are things that I haven't researched, and I agree with you that I should. So maybe for our next talk, you could send me an article or 2 on some of these topics, and I can read them thoroughly. And then if you had another thought on that, I did have. Finished. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go for it.
So rodenticides, herbicides like Roundup Ready, all of that. Those not only kill other plants that they call weeds, but they also kill animals. It's causing cancer in such high rates that Monsanto Bayer is having to pay billions of dollars in reparations for the cancer that they're causing. It that's another form of suffering that maybe vegans don't really, most of them don't value much. Insecticides. This is important regarding the honeybees are actually being wiped out by the insecticides that produce the vegan diet. Meanwhile, the vegans won't eat honey because bees are supposedly being exploited, but they're certainly willing to support the industries that are killing them with insecticides. Also, insecticides kill birds, not just hummingbirds, but many songbirds are going extinct. That caused by the insecticides. And then a lot of these birds actually that rely on insects for food, they're finding themselves starving to death because and starving to death is a very slow, very painful, very miserable way to die. And this is also being caused by the crop agriculture that produces the vegan menu. And then the fungicides, none of these pesticides are actually, strictly targeting what they're trying to kill. They'll kill funguses, and then they'll also kill animals. And so they're not target specific. They'll kill a lot of things that unintentionally, and really, if you're killing so many things unintentionally that you're driving them into extinction, that's a problem. And then also, all of these chemicals are actually petroleum derived. So this is also fueling the petroleum industry and all of the fracking. And now that we're kind of low on petroleum, this is a major issue. And then also all of these agrochemicals that are required for crop agriculture are also because of the hydrophobic nature of the soil, because of the constant tillage. The rain falls, it does not soak into the ground anymore because the soil is carbon deficient. And so all of these chemicals now get washed off into the streams and tributaries, causing trillions of fish to be killed. And all of these fungicides, insecticides, herbicides, rodenticides, mined phosphorus, mined potassium, synthetic nitrogen, all of that gets washed into the waterways, finds its way into the ocean. And now we have 95,000 square miles of oceanic dead zone. And that's primarily because of crop agriculture. And so you get into 95,000 square miles of dead zone. That's not just one plane of death. That's, how deep is the ocean? Each inch of ocean has life in it. And so you're killing not just 95,000 square miles of life, but countless layers of life all the way down to the ocean floor. And so you're doing that with these red tides, where not just plankton and shrimp and squid, but manatees and dolphins are washing up on the shore. The amount of animal death that's associated with mainstream factory crop agriculture, I think once we finally calculate the numbers, and I'm working with someone doing that right now, we're working on a scientific paper that will end up being peer reviewed. We're going to find out that those numbers are in the multiple quadrillions. And so before we outlaw nutritious animal foods, what we need to do is we need to get the crop agriculture under control, because it is out of control.
Yeah, I think a lot of vegans would agree with you if the details are correct, which probably at least many of them are. So yeah, that is very interesting. I do want to throw out a couple more questions, and then on a future talk, I don't know how long you like to talk, but I would love to have more talks, and they can be long. It's just tonight I have a family situation, but so I do have two more questions, and then like a kind of a final thought. But what are your thoughts on the idea of people having animals like a mink for fur alone? So I get the idea, if somebody hunts a rabbit, they eat the rabbit and use their fur, or you kill a cow for its beef, but you use it for leather. Do you think it's immoral, considering the advancements we have in clothing and blankets and stuff like that?
The issue is that when you say advancements in clothing, you need to go ahead and flesh that out, unpack it. And what you found is that all of these are petroleum derived chemicals. And the process of producing these substances requires gargantuan amounts of methane, heat, distillation, which requires pressure and heat. And so you end up with something that's not biodegradable. It's not as effective at keeping people warm, and it's not as effective at repelling water. It doesn't last as long. And so, why do you want to take the human race and put us 100% dependent upon the petroleum industry? I don't understand that.
Yeah, so I don't know enough about that, and that's probably the top thing I want to look into, because I think fur is one of the most important topics to me, just because it seems so unimportant for somebody to need fur. So what do you think?
Can you think of a fur replacement that's not petroleum derived?
I'm just wondering if we even need a fur replacement at all.
Well, they're talking right now. We've got the Biden administration that wants to outlaw wood stoves, wants to outlaw gas stoves, and we've got an electric grid that has been deemed insufficient. So if we can't keep ourselves warm with wood, we can't keep ourselves warm with gas, and we can't rely upon electricity, then why would you want to take away people's last resort to keep their bodies warm during the winter?
You're saying you would rather have like your blankets and stuff be made out of fur than whatever they're made out of?
What do you mean? Whatever they're made out of? What do you mean?
Well, I'm just wondering what you mean. So I don't know too many people that use fur, but I know that some do, and it continues to be used in certain fashion and whatnot.
Well, there's not just fur, but there's also wool. Okay, there's wool blankets. I know that right now wool blankets are in high demand.
Yeah,
and so
I'm just talking.
Is this
fur,
a war on humanity?
Well, I'm just talking fur specifically from animals that it's only their fur is used and nothing else. If that's morally acceptable. But I agree with you. There might be some issues. I don't know the details of what goes into making clothes and making a lot of things. And if looking into that, I decided fur is better than these other things. But
I think when you keep saying these other things, we're talking about petroleum. Can you?
Yeah. So I just mean so the
clothes
clothes.
That or no?
Well, I just don't know. I'm wondering if you agree with it, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean, like, are you saying that you think people should only wear fur and wool, and their blankets should only be those two things?
No, I think that people should have a choice to purchase whatever they want. However, I do not think that taking the human race and making them 100% reliant upon the petroleum industry in order to stay warm is really a good idea. I think if you look into it, you'll find that none of these petroleum derived substances that are being used to supposedly replace fur are effective at keeping people warm. There's a problem with a lot of the vegan community is that they've never been really cold and they've never been really hungry. And so they're willing to throw the entire human race at risk in order to prevent some animals from having to suffer the fate of serving us as either wool producers or fur producers. However, the petroleum-derived replacements of those, I will guarantee you, do not keep people warm like wool or fur do. People should, if people want to buy the plastics, then they should be free to do that. However, I also think that if people want to buy the more effective, non-petroleum reliant versions that are fur and wool, then they should also be free to do that. I think that you're playing a very dangerous game, especially in these days where we're being threatened with taking our wood stoves away and our gas stoves away. Because look at what's happening in China. China is being has been turned into this electric. Everything's electric. Everything's digital. They have this social credit system. Well, let's say the government wants everyone to be pro-abortion, and oh well, guess what? Carson is not pro-abortion. He's anti-abortion. Well, guess what? That might lower your credit score. They find that out about you, your credit score drops a certain amount of points. They find out you've got some other philosophies that are aligned with so-called conservative values, and your credit score falls a little bit lower. And you've gotten behind all of these campaigns to get rid of wood stoves, gas stoves, fur coats, wool blankets, and so now all you've got is petroleum. And they decide, well, if you're not going to behave and think the way we want, we're going to lower your credit score. And if it gets below a certain threshold, then we'll just limit the amount of electricity that is available to you for cooking and heating this month. And so all of a sudden you find yourself freezing to death because you didn't hold the right principles according to the powers that be. Mm. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is all publicly available information. Mm-hmm. This is look into China's social credit system, and you look into what's happening around the world in other in Europe, Britain, UK, Australia, United States. You'll find out that they're getting ready to implement the same type of social credit system. Mm-hmm. So is it smart? I don't think it's smart to outlaw people's ability to stay warm.
Gotcha. Well, I will say that I agree that to stay warm, you got to do what you got to do. So if I was stranded somewhere and I had to kill a bear or something or whatever and take its fur to stay warm, I would. I guess at this point, I don't want to get too far into the weeds of the politics of it, but I think obviously there's so many factors. So I'm not saying that you are wrong on the things that you're saying. Your average blanket that somebody buys is not a fur one, and your average most clothes you buy aren't fur, and so wool being separate from that. I know that there are some issues. There are issues with fake furs where there's certain kinds of chemicals and issues with them, but I guess it would be complicated. I would want to know if there's concern with our current bazillion options of blankets and clothing to decide if I think those concerns are enough to make have a need for fur.
Well, there really aren't that many options.
Like, what do you have? What kind of blankets do you have?
I have cotton and wool, and I don't have any fur, but cotton and wool.
Like, is the issue with cotton is that the chemical side of how it's produced?
I don't have cotton. Well, my first job when I was 12 years old was chopping cotton, and that was actually back in the early 1970s, not early. About 1980, actually. This was before all of the chemicals were prevalent in the cotton industry. And we were actually I was out there working with a bunch of illegal immigrants, and we each had a hoe, and we would chop down the weeds around every cotton plant. And so we were surgically removing all of the weeds, no chemicals. Today, the cotton industry is actually one of the most chemical hungry industries out there. So yes, there's an issue with, here we've got the prospect of having everyone replaced with robots and computers. Meanwhile, also pesticides. Why don't we just get rid of the pesticides and put people to work out there in the fields, chopping the weeds away from the valuable plants so that we don't have to use all of these pesticides that are killing the wildlife and destroying the habitat and driving animals into extinction, etc. But you say that there's this plethora of choice regarding blankets and coats and stuff like that. There's really not. There's just a couple of natural fibers like cotton, fur, and wool, and so there's three natural, and then you move into all the others, and there's a million different names for different petroleum derived fibers, and they don't last as long. So they end up getting discarded into the landfills. They contribute to the landfill pollution and emissions that are associated with all of the landfill crap.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go buy another one of these petroleum derived fiber warming fabrics, and it lasts a couple of years, and then you throw that one away. And so I think once you actually study it and get your head wrapped around it, you'll find that there's a whole lot less suffering involved with the fur trade and not the cotton. The cotton needs to be reformed, but the wool and the wool and the fur are probably the least suffering that's out there. But when you start looking into the petroleum derived fibers that are being, and you've got polyester, you've got all kinds of different types of petroleum derived. And I don't know why the vegans don't actually kind of dislike petroleum. I don't know what the affinity for petroleum stuff is, but vegans seem to really love petroleum based products. Petroleum is a finite resource. That's a dead end street, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll find some sources to send you on issues with fur farms, just small cages and that kind of stuff, showing like the suffering that happens there. And then, but again, I'm willing to look into anything.
Let's say you've got a fur, something made of fur, and how many generations do you think that will last?
Well, I don't know much about it. Maybe a lot.
Yeah, multiple generations can use that coat.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple
so similar to
could use a wool, like a pair of wool. I've got several pairs of wool socks that were handed down to me from my grandfather, and they just keep getting softer and better over time.
Oh,
and so why would you want to get rid of something like that where the product that's produced lasts for basically forever? You don't have to replace it. But then you get into this petroleum crap, and you've got to replace it and replace it and replace it and replace it and replace it. I do not understand this vegan affinity for petroleum products.
For sure. No, and it might be a lack of knowledge. I don't know much about petroleum at all, actually. So I'm not the best person to talk about this, but I do like to learn in general. But yeah, I in my mind, the idea is I don't want something to suffer. So where I see this suffering, I'm going to step away from that and not
Have you ever heard of the
this.
phrase "out of sight, out of mind"?
Yeah.
I think that's a syndrome that most vegans suffer from.
Well, I think most humans suffer from that.
Yes, you're right. But I think vegans in particular, for instance, I think this is a perfect example where you want to send me some information on how animals suffer for fur, when really, if you're reasonable, shouldn't you be actually saying, you know what, I don't know enough about this issue yet. You've shown me some facets to this disco ball that I haven't examined. I need to get my head wrapped around the death and suffering and destruction that's being caused by these petroleum derived warming fabrics. And before I actually campaign to outlaw fur, then maybe I need to understand the dark side of the fabrics that I'm trying to promote. And so maybe you should be saying to me, asking me, why don't you send me some information on these things that I don't know about?
No. I do want that. And I thought I mentioned that almost every time. I want you to send me if I got too many things, it'd probably be too overwhelming. So maybe we could just pick a couple topics, but I didn't want you to see a thing on fur because I think I know the other side so well. I I just, similar to how you have your farm, and your farm seems way different than factory farming. If we looked at an example of how like your average fur farm is, we could talk about how if fur is a good thing to have, then maybe there should be regulations that make it so they can have cages twice that size, or something like a mink that naturally would live about half of its life in the water, doesn't get access to water when they're at a fur farm. And various different things, like, because in my mind the idea is to get away from the suffering. So if I'm convinced that we need something, then I would say, well, what's the most reasonable amount of suffering we can allow? So I do want to read and learn about the petroleum side of things and other fabrics. I didn't even know if you were, when we were talking about cotton, if you were going to say that cotton, what the way it's done is, it would be factored into the petroleum side. I didn't, I guess I know cotton itself is natural, but, so anyways, yes, a lot of this is new to me, and I'm very happy to look into it.
Okay. Yeah, what I think that we should do, rather than trying to criminalize me, trying to criminalize you, you trying to criminalize me, because, well, for one, I've made the move. I've reformed my animal agriculture so that we're not, I have no part in any concentrated feedlot. I do not feed soybean. I do not feed corn. I've stockpiled grazing for the winter. I'm not even requiring supplemental hay at this point. I'm rebuilding the soil by sequestering atmospheric carbon back into the soil where it once was, so that the soil can absorb water again, so that it can hold water again, so that it can support vegetation again. The lushness of the forage is improving here every year. So I've already made the transition. I'm reforming. So what I would really request from you vegans is, why don't you be reasonable and reform your own backyard first. Once you have crop agriculture, which is killing quadrillions of animals, causing untold amounts of suffering and death, reform your own backyard. Once you get that reformed, then maybe we'll have this animal agriculture completely reformed as well. And we can reform everything, rather than me trying to turn you into a criminal, and you trying to turn me into a criminal, and banning this and banning that, and threatening the food supply and threatening people with freezing to death. Let's reform everything.
No, I agree with you, and I don't want to ban anything in like some wild sense. I think we both agree that banning needs to happen. We can't beat a cow with a bat. We can't beat a dog with a bat.
We're already there.
Yeah, exactly. There. No, exactly. And so we're already there.
Laws against that.
Yeah, and so we want to figure out where exactly the laws should be. Laws can change over time, and so I don't need you to say that fur shouldn't exist. You can have your argument, and you had information that I didn't even know about that I'm going to look into. But we can look at how things are done, and we can recognize if something is more like beating a cow with a bat than it is less like that. And so each little bit of how something's done, we can just say, this shouldn't be done this way anymore. And maybe there aren't any at all that need to change, but I would guess that I think it's perfectly fair to say that maybe farms should not be able to keep a living mink out of its like natural type of habitat. I'd want them to be more like what you're doing, where the mink would not be in a tiny cage that's the width and length of 2 pieces of paper, and it would be a bigger area, and there would be water so they can live better while they're alive. And then you kill it and use their fur for lasting generations, whatever.
I can get behind that.
Yeah, so not that I'm necessarily in favor of that, but I'm always in favor of progress toward better than what we have now. Like, seriously, I think what you're doing is amazing. I wish every factory farm did what you're doing. I wish the subsidies were removed to lead towards that happening. I just think all these things are worth talking about, including a lot of the things you're bringing up.
One of the things that's happened Carson, is that they've taken land value and they factored in everything is like tied into the commercial real estate industry, and so commercial real estate is very expensive, and so that instead of having it kind of compartmentalized from like over here you've got residential, over here you've got commercial, over here you've got agricultural, the price of agricultural property is actually being driven up by the price of the commercial uh, property. And so right now the price of agricultural land is way overinflated when you compare it to the profit that you can make in agriculture. And so very few people can actually justify spending money on acreage that they're going to try to raise animals regeneratively on. And so what they do is now they subsidize the corn industry. And so now it's much more profitable for someone, instead of doing it with my method, what's more profitable is to buy just a little piece of property and spend the money on the corn, which is subsidized. And so by subsidizing the corn, and you inflate the price of the agricultural land, and you deflate the price of the concentrated feedlot feed, and then it becomes a no-brainer for most businessmen to just do the concentrated feedlot model, because they've been hedged into that by the subsidy model. So remove those subsidies and the concentrated feedlots go away.
Yeah.
Because there's no incentive anymore. But simultaneously you'd have to take agricultural land and unhook it from the prices that are being that they're being linked to through the overall real estate prices, which are being driven up by the general commercial real estate market.
Yeah, no, and I feel like most vegans would have to agree with you here. And if they don't, they're just the type that are the loudest, just being the most extreme. But it is complicated. But what I would say in my last couple minutes before I really have to hop off here, I'll save my other topic for later. I was going to ask you your thoughts on like eating unhealthy foods that have animal products, if you think of that as morally wrong because somebody is letting something suffer, not for their own health needs. You could throw out a thought if you want on that, or we could talk about that next time.
Well, yeah, I've heard you speak on that before, kind of like animal foods are consumed only for taste pleasure. I actually was a professional sports nutritionist for many years. I was an internationally certified strength and conditioning specialist. My first big nutrition gig was with Duke University's men's basketball team, and they hired Scott McTeer, who was a retired professional tennis player. He was also another CSCS at the time. He subcontracted me to put that program together for Duke's men's basketball team. They won the national championship the next season on my program.
That's cool.
And that was the first big team thing that I did. I also worked with other college football programs. I was an All-American football player myself, put myself through college, have a kinesiology degree with a biology minor, did it on athletic scholarship. I actually walked on and achieved that through largely through learning about optimal human nutrition. I've worked with athletes from just about every sport you can think of, from even the lower levels like middle school all the way up to professional. The only level that I haven't worked with is Olympic. I've never worked with an Olympic athlete, but I've worked with lots of professional athletes. I can't really find a vegan that can have a one-on-one conversation with me about optimal human nutrition. I do not think that animal foods are for taste pleasure only. I'm speaking from experience, not only in my professional career, but also I'm telling you that my brother was born with spina bifida, which is a debilitating, hugely suffering birth defect that's caused by a plant-based diet. And I'm telling you that animal foods are not for taste pleasure only.
Yeah, no. I think I might have worded it slightly wrong. What I meant is the ones that are like, so like, let's say that you could say that meat and all the organs are good for you and eggs are good for you. And let's say even milk, but something like eating ice cream or eating hot dogs or chicken nuggets, things that nobody on any side of any aisle would call healthy. If there is suffering that goes into that, would your personal philosophy be that that act shouldn't happen? Not a legal one necessarily, but yeah.
Well, the majority of ice cream, for example, today is actually spiked with canola oil, soybean oil, lots of seed oils. If, let's say, you get rid of the dark side of dairy, that 60% that's artificially inseminated, get rid of the hormones. You back off to a cow that doesn't have udders so huge that it can't walk anymore. What I'm saying is that rather than constantly like frothing at the mouth to ban stuff, let's reform stuff.
I'm not talking about banning stuff. I just mean the things that are making us Americans so overweight. These seed oils you're talking about, but also the processed sugar, the white flours. So making your typical cake. The part
like
of it's
the chicken
just
McNuggets you talk about. Let's look at the majority. Let's look at the ingredients that go into that. There's probably more than 50% of the ingredients that go into chicken McNuggets are actually plant based. Same thing with the burgers. You've got these huge buns, one on top, one below, and then you've got this seed based mayonnaise. And then you've got tomatoes, onions, lettuce. And so you end up with a product that's like 75% plant-based and 25%, this really thin little meat patty that's in the middle. And you want to call that a meat product. That's laughable. That's criminally laughable.
I'm not necessarily wanting to call it a meat product. I'm saying that somebody is contributing to suffering while not eating healthfully, whether the unhealthy part is the plants or not. I'm just pointing out that like I would kill to be healthy, but to kill or harm to eat cake or ice cream or these various different unhealthy things. I just think it's fair to call that a concern worth looking at.
It is a concern worth looking at. However, I've watched a lot of your videos. I wanted to know where you were coming from before we sat down and had this conversation. And I know on at least one occasion where you confessed to being overweight, probably because you were eating too many vegan donuts. So I think, there's an old saying that you start with the man in the mirror. And I think that that's probably where we need to start, is that each person who's pointing fingers and wants to ban this and criminalize that is, like I've asked repeatedly, is get your own backyard in order. And then once you've got that ironed out and reformed, then you can reasonably talk about criminalizing other people. But as long as you're part of the problem, then I don't really think that you need to be trying to criminalize other people.
Oh, for sure. And right now I'm just talking about the ethics. But no, I agree. I made a video on whether or not I think vegans should be healthy, should be at a healthy weight and get in shape. Because if we're going to be sharing this idea of this good, healthy diet, but somebody's like a couple 100 pounds overweight or something, it's not a good example. And if we all looked like vegan gains or something, then maybe it'll make the diet look a little better. But no, I agree with you. I'm just pointing out, over consuming anything is causing harm to things. So I would call that even morally wrong, even if I do it.
Sure.
Even when I thought it was wrong to eat animals and I ate animals, I had my philosophy on it, but I still did the thing. And so I'm just pointing out that like I think vegans are so extreme that they make it to where nobody can talk about if non-vegans care about suffering or not. And I think that's really a conversation that needs to be had. Instead of trying to make everybody go vegan, I think we need to get everybody just talking about if they care about suffering or not. So I think eating ice cream and cookies and cakes when they have dairy in it, adding that element to the dairy industry while not consuming healthy things is a way different subject than if you're eating what might be thought of as healthy beef or something. And so I just, instead of vegans saying all or nothing, I really want to get all the people eating ice cream and cake that are overweight, like myself, to talk about if maybe they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, if you take a picture of any sidewalk in a big city right now where there's a lot of people, most of them are going to be obese. You don't have to be 100 or 200 pounds overweight to be a problem.
Yeah.
You can just be overweight. You can be obese. You can be morbidly obese. But as soon as you become overweight, then now all of your risk for all kinds of diseases, cancer, heart disease, everything, whether you're vegan or not, goes way, way, way up. And so, but let's go back in time to say like the 20s, and you had people that you take a picture. There are photographs from big cities where people are walking in the street, and everyone is healthy and lean, and look like Olympic athletes. They're all probably walking everywhere they go. They're doing a fair amount of exercise, and the amount of sugar that they're consuming is way, way, way below what we're consuming today.
Yeah, all home cooked meals.
Yeah, home cooked meals. The amount of seed oils that they're consuming is virtually zero, and they were eating some ice cream, but these were old-fashioned Holstein cows that were being hand milked, and the ice cream maker was one of these hand cranked things where people would, families would gather on the porch and they'd make a batch of ice cream, and everyone would get a little serving, and it would be a big community building fellowship, and we would have ice cream. So I don't think it's ice cream that needs to be demonized. It's this ultra processed garbage, whether it's plant-based, animal-based, this whole ultra processed garbage industry, which is very, very heavily supported by the pharmaceutical industry, needs to be kicked aside by the people.
Oh, I'm with you.
If they won't do it by removing the subsidies that are encouraging it, then we need to get together, the vegans, the carnivores, the omnivores. We all need to get together and to come together under a reasonable plan to kick that system aside and do something where all of the dark side of every industry is reformed, and we can get back to a diet that's optimal for human nutrition and optimal for the animal, and optimal for the environment.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I do got to hop off here. I want to throw out one last thought. Like, I think you mentioned something at the beginning of this where some people have told you that you're more vegan than most people or most vegans. And now I don't know until I do more research if I would make the claim more vegan than most vegans, but I think you're more vegan than most people. And I think of you as a philosophical vegan from everything you've said today. Cause really it comes down to the suffering. It comes down to, we got to do what we have to do for ourselves. And then past that, it comes down to the suffering. So it's complicated. It's a huge issue. There's a lot to go over. But yeah, I'm thinking of you as a philosophical vegan, and thank you for talking to me.
I also think that I am a philosophical vegan. I do not agree with most vegans, but that's because I don't think that most vegans actually are being reasonable. And I did read through, your comments when you were, going through questioning some of my subscribers. And I saw you as someone that actually might be reasonable. That's why I actually chose you as someone to bring on and have this conversation with, because I thought that you and I would actually be able to find some common ground. because I can't find common ground with most of the big vegan influencers, because I don't think that they're actually trying to. I don't think that they actually have vegan. They're not trying to reduce suffering. They're just trying to remove nutrition, is what it looks like to me. And I've seen you've actually been critical of some of the major, high profile vegan influencers, and I appreciate that as well. So I have to also give you kudos to being one of the very few vegans who actually seem to be sincere.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, I better hop off here. Got to take care of some things, but let's talk again soon, maybe in a couple weeks.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on,
All right.
Carson.
Take care. Yep. See ya.
Good night. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.